problem that a sukkah can be a permanent dwelling. Okay, what if your sukkah is too small, too low? If your sukkah is less than 10 tefachim, which is about 1 yard, that's too small, no good. What about your sukkah only has 2 walls to it? No good. The third wall has to be at least 4 tefachim wide. 4 tefachim, and it doesn't even have to be whole. It can be 1 tefach and still close to the 2 walls that are shaped like an L. One of those 2 walls, that's also good. Okay, what about if you don't have enough schach on the roof? What schach made of, we'll learn later, but basically it's made from vegetation that's not attached to the ground. You have to have schach. How much do you have to have? At least so that when the sun is directly overhead, that there's more shadow on the ground than there is direct sunlight. Direct sunlight. What about an old sukkah? An old sukkah means a sukkah that was not made for the sake of Sukkot, and it was there 30 days before. And Beit Shammai says no good. Beit Hillel says it's okay. And we says, what does it mean an old sukkah? Anytime it was made before the holiday, 30 days. But if you made it before the holiday, then even if you made it in the beginning, if you made it for the sake of the holiday, then even from the beginning of the year, it is okay. In other words, you put the schach up on the top, not for the sake of sukkah. Now let's go down and look at that. I think we did everything else up to that point. So let's see. An old sukkah. Here we go. An old sukkah. An old sukkah is no good. What is an old sukkah? We'll see. We just finished learning. 30 days before, Beit Shammai says no good. Beit Hillel says it's okay. What is an old sukkah? Anything that was made 30 days before the holiday, namely that it was made stam. What does it mean, stam? You just had 4 walls and you threw all sorts of old leaves and branches and things like that, let's say from your garden. But you have a gardener who works on your garden, and instead of throwing all this cut leaves and cut things that he uses, he throws it on top of this old shed that doesn't have a roof on top of it. No, how could this possibly be? You make it not for the sake of the holiday, and it could be good if it's less than 30 days. What does that mean? Let's look and see. Beit Shammai says, I see. Beit Shammai says that it's no good. Why? Because it wasn't made for the sake of the holiday. The reason is explained that says Chag HaSukkot, you have to make 7 days. The sukkah has to be made for the name of the holiday. Beit Hillel says that it's okay. Why? Because according to them, you don't have to make the sukkah for the name of the holiday. They just say, another way, the sukkah, holiday of sukkah should be made for you. Observe Sukkot, but not the sukkah itself. But everybody agrees that if you do make it for the sake of the holiday, then even if you make it from the beginning of the year, in other words, even if you made it 1 year before the holiday, like for instance, after 1 year of Chag Sukkos, you said to yourself, this year I'm not going to wait till the last minute, and you made the sukkah for the sake of the sukkah, but basically you could even use the same sukkah you had last year. Even Beit Shammai will say if it's there the whole year, it's okay. And also if you just made it a sukkah stam, you made a sukkah within 30 days of the holiday, but you didn't say you're making it for the sake of the holiday. Well, since it's so near to the holiday and people 1 month before the holiday, Jews are supposed to be learning the laws. We're talking about a religious Jew, learning the laws of the holiday. So probably if you made it before the holiday, within 30 days before the holiday, you had sukkah in mind. So Bavada, certainly in the name of the holiday you made it, and therefore Beit Shammai will also say, okay. A person who made a sukkah under a tree, huh? Now your sukkah, you have to have, like I said, foliage. That has to be on the roof. The main thing of the sukkah is what we call the schach, what's on top of it, the roof. The walls can be there for thick stone walls that can be there from the beginning of creation. You don't have to make them for any special reason. The main thing is the schach. So the schach has to be foliage. So let's say you get a bright idea and you think to yourself, hey, you know what? I'm going to build these 4 walls under this low tree that I have. I have this really nice tree, a nice willow tree. And instead of cutting off the branches, and then after Sukkot, you got to get rid of the branches, and they have a certain amount of holiness to them, the schach. So instead of just having all this problem, what to do with it, I'll make my sukkah underneath a tree, and the branches will be for my schach. Good idea, terrible idea. It won't work. If you want to make it under a tree, I got a better idea. Make it in your house. Make it in your house. In your house is nice weather there. The rain won't come in because the branches that are on the roof have to be cut off from the ground before you put them on. We'll learn about that. What if you make a sukkah on top of a sukkah? Make a double-decker sukkah. The top sukkah is okay because it's directly under the heavens. The bottom sukkah is no good. Why? Because there's people walking on the. We'll see why. Rabbi Yehuda says, if there's no one living in the top sukkah, then the bottom sukkah is okay. You just have 2 ceilings, so they're far away from each other. What's the problem? One who makes a sukkah underneath a tree, namely that he takes the leaves, the branches of the tree, and he pulls them down on top of his sukkah, since that they're still attached to the sukkah, like we're going to explain in the 4th, that branches that are still attached to the tree are no good for schach. So it's as though you made it in your house, as though you put it underneath the roof of your house, and it's puzzle. It's no good. What if you decide to build a double-decker sukkah? One on top of the other one, right? You want to be in the newspapers or something. For instance, you put schach on top of a lower sukkah, and that becomes now the floor for the upper sukkah. And we're talking about that he used, branches, but they weren't attached to a tree. That's kosher. The bottom says the top sukkah is good and the bottom sukkah is no good. And the Brisa explains that the reason is, it says, is you have to sit in a sukkah. It's a pasuk in the Torah, but sukkah's teishvu. You have to sit in a sukkah and not in a sukkah that's underneath a sukkah. And you're supposed to sit, the only thing separating between you and the heavens are the branches you put on the top. Not a whole entire other sukkahs on top of your sukkah. That's the reason it says it's no good. The Rambam explains the reason the bottom one is no good is as it's like you made a sukkah inside of a house. It's too similar to a house. So there's people that are walking around on your roof. Your roof has become not a roof. Rabbi Yehuda says if there's nobody walking around in the upper one, in other words, that the top sukkah is not fit for anyone to walk in. The roof that you made is too weak to be a floor for the top sukkah. Then it says in that case, then the bottom sukkah is okay. And the Gemara explains that if the schach of the bottom one is so weak that it's impossible for anyone to put blankets or pillows on it in order to dwell there, to sit there, then everyone agrees that the bottom sukkah is okay. It's okay with the upper schach, but on the condition that it shouldn't be too high. The upper one, because the upper one is going to be your main schach, it shouldn't be higher than 20 amma, than 30 feet. If the bottom sukkah is really strong and it could be a floor for the bottom for the top sukkah, and you're able to put like furniture on there, then everyone agrees that the bottom was no good. If so, where do they make an argument? The argument is, and everyone agrees that if you have two sukkahs, right? A bottom one and a top one. Each one has its schach on the roof. If the bottom one, the roof of the bottom one is so weak, the roof is so weak that a person couldn't stand on it or lay on it, then everyone agrees that the bottom sukkah is okay, that the top schach is your schach. In other words, the bottom ceiling does not disqualify the top ceiling. And everyone agrees that if the bottom ceiling is so strong that a person could walk on it, that it does disqualify the upper one. If so, where is the argument over here? Where is the argument? Lo nechlachot Tamakama and Rabbi Yehuda only argue, the first opinion argues against Rabbi Yehuda, except if the schach of the bottom one is weak and it can't hold pillows and whatever it is and mattresses easily. It does hold them, it will hold them, but only you have to be like really, really step on it very, very lightly. So if the bottom sukkah, the schach of the bottom sukkah is so weak that you can't step on it strongly, use it as a floor, but nevertheless it's strong enough that you could use it as a floor if you were really sort of gentle about it. That's going to be the argument. According to the first opinion, this is called a sukkah underneath the sukkah and it's no good. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he says, since the top one is not really fit for living in, only if you really super careful, then therefore the top sukkah doesn't disqualify the bottom one. The bottom sukkah is not considered to be like a sukkah underneath a sukkah, and it's kosher. And the law is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Don't make one sukkah over another one. Why would you want to do that? For the same reason that the person in the Mishnah did it. You made a mistake. Don't do it. Mishnah number 3. What if you made a nice sukkah? You had the right number of walls. It was the right height. You had the right amount of schach on it. Ready to go. But you spread a blanket over it because the sun was wrecking all of the schach. It was just too hot. Or you put a blanket or whatever is a sheet underneath it because you didn't want all this schach falling in your soup. Or you spread it on top of a kinof, which we're going to see what is a kinof. If you did that, it's no good. But if you spread it on top of the naklite of a porous, you are allowed to spread it on top of the posts of a bed. Okay, what does this mean? Now, I just want to remind you, what exactly is the Mishnah? The Mishnah are verbal codes, shorthand, to remind the rabbis of laws. You have to remember that the Torah was given to Moshe with its explanation. Some of it was given without an explanation. Some of it was given for the rabbis to explain later. That's what's called the 13 principles that the Torah is learned from. We say that every day in our davening. In any case, what was written down, God wrote down to Moshe, these were exactly the letters that God wanted. And they contained seed ideas, which basically alone cannot be understood. That's like we talked yesterday about the argument with the Tzedukim and this. Oh, by the way, you're right. The Tzedukim started in the middle of the Second Temple. The ones that made the trouble in the beginning of the Second Temple, that was the Shomranim. My mistake. the Shomranim, they were the ones that tried to delay or to prevent the building of the second temple. Okay, that was the Tzaddukim, but you're right. Okay, in any case, the Shomranim, and there were other groups. Some people say that there was the Tzaddukim and the Baitusim, and afterwards the Karaim. Karaim there are still a bunch of them, and they're not Jews. They live near Har Gerizim. Nevertheless, so they came and they made their own explanations of what the Torah says. But the Mishnah, these were passed down by the rabbis. And I want to stress that the rabbis that wrote the Mishnah, the one who wrote the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, says that the least of his pupils had the power to raise the dead. It's a story, if I'm not mistaken, in Avodah Zorah. I learned it not long ago. Okay, so these are the Mishnah. Now we have the explanation of the Mishnah. So the Mishnahs that we're learning, this is just like verbal codes. So now we're learning the explanation. Kahati, this Rabbi Pinchas Kahati, he took the explanations from the Gemara. He simply went through the Gemara, and he also went through all the other explainers of the Mishnah, the Bartanura especially, and the Tiferes Yisrael and the others, and he wrote down his own explanation, which is sort of more in the language of our time. What is this? So let's go. Again, now you have a nice sukkah and you spread on top of it a sheet or a blanket because of the heat, or you spread underneath the schach because you don't want it to fall down into your food, or you spread it on top of a kinof. It's no good. Let's see what this is. Kinof, what is the things? If you spread on top of the sukkah, namely on top of the schach, a sheet because of the sun, in order to protect against the people who are sitting there against the sun, gets very hot, or underneath it, or he spreads a sheet under the sukkah, namely under the schach, because of the leaves that fall off from the schach, so that they shouldn't be falling on your table. Some people say because of the sun. What does it mean? Because in order to protect the schach from the sun so that it won't dry up. And because of the nesher, what does it mean? Because so that the leaves themselves will not fall off, and that will make the schach too weak. Then there'll be too much sunlight shining through. In other words, in these two things, he wants to make it that the sukkah will not, that the schach will not dry up and shrivel up, so that the sun will be more than the shade. What is a sadin? What is this sheet? It's a thing that receives tuma. It's a vessel. It's a garment, if you want to call it. It was made in a factory, or you made it. Anything which receives tuma is forbidden for the schach. We'll learn, that's going to be the next mission. We're going to learn what are the qualifications for being schach. After all, that's the most important thing of the sukkah. That's the name of the holiday, sukkah, is because of the sukkah. Or you put it on top of a kinof. What's kinof? Kinof are 4 poles that stand on the 4 corners of a bed. And on these 4 poles are stretched a rope from one to the other. And you spread on top of these things a sheet, which means that you made like a little building inside of your sukkah, right? You have this, it's like 4 walls over your bed. Well, this is no good. This is no good. It makes it puzzle. The sukkah is no good if you sit in this place, which is covered all over by 4 walls on the side and another roof, because this is it's called schach pasul. All of these that we had, you're using a sheet for schach. You can't put on your schach if you don't have enough foliage You can't like throw old pairs of pants and rags and things like that. You can't do that. The schach has to be made from something that grows in the ground, and you did not work on it. We'll see. Sometimes planks of wood can be okay. We'll see. It's also the puzzle, the kinuf. Also, if you're underneath this kinuf, underneath this canopy, you're not allowed to eat there or sleep there underneath the sheet. Why? Because the sheet is considered to be like a tent, and the tent separates between him and the schach, and you're supposed to sleep and eat in a sukkah, and you're not doing it. But you can spread a sheet on the naklite mita. What does it mean? Two poles that are on either side of the bed, the head of the bed and the foot of the bed, in the middle. And you put a sheet over it, and it looks like a V, like a tent, right? A V. One is at the foot of the bed, one is at the head of the bed, one at the foot. And on this pole, from one pole to the other, is another pole in the middle, or another rope. Now, when you put the sheet over this middle one, so it comes down a slant. And if this slant is very narrow to the point that there is not one tefach wide on the top, within 4 amos, it doesn't say, within 4 tefachim from the top, then the sheet is not considered to be an oel, and it's okay. It's almost like sitting in a sukkah with a hat on. You have a hat over your head, right? That doesn't disqualify the schach that's over it. You don't have to take off your hat. You don't have to take off your kippah, right? Your toupee is sitting under the sukkah, under the schach. It just has to be that there's no not kosher schach that separates between you and the sukkah and the schach that's on the roof. So if this tent that you make is narrow enough, it slants down, then it still is kosher. And we'll 1 minute. Let's just go to the next Mishnah, and this is what we're going to learn tomorrow. If you pulled down on top of your sukkah, you pull down vines or grapevines or gourd vines or other types of foliage, no good, because it's still attached to the ground. If the good schach is more than the bad schach, or if you cut these vines off before you put them on, that's okay. This is the general principle, and we'll learn about this tomorrow. Anything which receives tuma, which is susceptible to ritual impurity, namely a vessel, anything which can receive impurity, or anything that does not grow from the ground, even though it doesn't receive impurity, but doesn't grow from the ground. Let's say you have, for instance, pieces of metal that aren't vessels. So it doesn't receive impurity. That's good, but it never grew from the ground. So that disqualifies it. You cannot make schach. Anything which does not receive tuma and it does grow from the ground, you are allowed to make schach from it as long as it's not attached to the ground. And we're going to talk about this in detail, God willing, tomorrow. And now let's go to the Kitzur Shul.